In the first half of 1797, Daniel Morgan Boone, the oldest surviving son of Daniel Boone, returned to Kentucky from an extended exploration down the Mississippi River. He had hunted and trapped for a time near the headwaters of the Tombigbee River in what would become the state of Mississippi, and decided he did not like the country. Boone's son was in search of new lands. Settlers in Kentucky had become too numerous, driving up land prices and depleting wild game. In the course of his travels, Daniel Morgan heard rumors of unsettled available lands in Missouri. He determined to go take a look. But he returned home first to recruit a couple of traveling companions and consult with his father. Daniel Boone Sr., now 62 years old, had lived for the last couple of years with his wife Rebecca and youngest son Nathan in a cabin the family built on Daniel Morgan's property. The senior Boone had suffered a series of financial setbacks in recent years. He was also embroiled in legal troubles stemming from land speculation activities gone awry. Now, old Boone had had his fill of Kentucky, and despite his age, like son Daniel Morgan, he was looking for a new start in a new wild country. In 1797, Missouri was actually outside the United States. It lay on the eastern boundary of Spanish Louisiana, a huge section of the continent, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains and from the Canadian border to New Orleans. St. Louis, its largest settlement above New Orleans, operated as the northern hub of commerce and administration. The territory took its name from the French, who owned it first. But France ceded it to Spain in 1762, near the end of the 7 Years' War. By 1797, the Spanish were having trouble holding on to it. The British were pressing down from Canada with help from their Indian allies. The Spanish lieutenant governor in St. Louis hoped to block this encroachment with new settlers, but few Spanish citizens were interested, so he turned to the Americans. He distributed handbills in Kentucky and elsewhere, offering free land with no property taxes to American frontiersmen willing to resettle in the Spanish-controlled domain west of the Mississippi. The Boones were willing. 28-year-old Daniel Morgan determined to go scout the new country and report back with his findings. The elder Boone asked his son to pay a visit to the Spanish lieutenant governor. Boone Sr. wished to know how much land would be granted to heads of families and children. He was also curious if new settlers would be required to embrace the Catholic religion. Daniel Morgan set off to seek answers to those questions, and with luck, located a new Boone family homeland in Missouri in the fall of 1797. Daniel Morgan liked what he saw in Missouri. He applied for a rich tract of land on the northern bank of the Missouri River near Femme Osage Creek, some 40 miles west of St. Louis. The Spanish lieutenant governor happily granted the request and penned a letter to Morgan's famous father, Daniel Boone Sr., offering to do the same for him and as many settlers as the elder Boone could bring with him. Morgan reported his findings back at home in the spring of 1798, and then returned to Missouri to build a double log cabin and clear land for a crop. With an initial landing point established, he made a final journey back to Kentucky to help his parents and extended family prepare for the migration west. Migrations of this scale were nothing new in the history of the Boone family, and Daniel Morgan wasn't the first Boone son sent off to reconnoiter new lands for a family exodus. Nearly a century earlier, in 1713, Morgan's grandfather, Squire Boone, along with Squire's older brother and sister, were sent off on a similar mission, but their journey entailed crossing the Atlantic Ocean. In 1713, the Boones lived in southern England, in the town of Bradninch near Exeter. They were also Quakers, and in the early 1700s in England, adhering to Quaker beliefs could make life difficult. Quakers believed that all men had an inner light, a sort of spiritual connection with God, making the priests, ceremonies, and other formal trappings of the Church of England unnecessary. Quakers did not have churches at all. When they gathered for religious purposes, they came together in simple structures called meeting houses, containing rows of wooden benches. The meetings primarily entailed silent group meditation with no designated leader. Since all were considered equal, anyone compelled to do so could speak. Such unorthodox religious practices were irksome to government officials. But most irksome of all, possibly, was that Quakers refused to pay tithes to the state-sponsored church. Such nonconformity invited retaliation. Quakers were shunned from many forms of public life, generally persecuted, and often jailed for periods of time. By the early 1700s, members of the Society of Friends, as Quakers referred to themselves, were in search of a new homeland, one where they could live according to their unconventional beliefs in relative peace. One prominent friend, William Penn, happened to be the son of a wealthy admiral and politician, an admiral and politician to whom the King of England was financially indebted. Following Admiral Penn's death, the debt owed to him by the king passed to Penn's son, William. As a means of finally discharging the debt, as well as encouraging the unwanted Quaker sect to immigrate to America, the king granted William Penn an enormous tract of land that would ultimately become the state of Pennsylvania, a name meaning Penn's Woods. In 1682, William founded the colony of Pennsylvania as a sanctuary for religious freedom and as a refuge for Quakers. Eventually, Daniel Boone's Quaker grandfather, George Boone, became curious about this new land. In 1713, he sent 3 of his children to scout Penn's province in America. The Boone children sent back promising reports, and in 1717, George Boone and the rest of his family made the crossing of the Atlantic to settle in Pennsylvania. They ultimately established their home in the Ole Valley near today's Reading, northwest of Philadelphia. Both a weaver and a farmer, George Boone soon earned the trust and respect of his neighbors, and in time became a justice of the peace for his area. He also treated local Indians well, and groups of them would occasionally visit his home when their travels took them nearby. This attitude of fair and friendly dealings with Indians would later take root in the mind of at least one of George's grandsons, Daniel Boone. Infant Daniel entered the world in Pennsylvania's Ole Valley in October 1734. But another Boone family attitude, one of independence and self-determination, would eventually cut short young Daniel's time in Pennsylvania. Daniel's father, Squire, had done well enough for himself since arriving in America. He had become a farmer and weaver like George, but he had also acquired marketable blacksmithing skills, along with skills as a gunsmith. He had married a Welsh Quaker girl named Sarah Morgan in 1720, and by 1750, the couple had 11 children, with Daniel, 15 years old in 1750, being the 6th of the lot. But 2 of Squire's other children, Sarah, the oldest, and Israel, next in line, both created an uncomfortable religious embarrassment for their parents. They both chose to marry outside the Quaker faith, and in the first instance, oldest daughter Sarah was actually with child before the wedding. This did not sit well with the leaders of the local Quaker meeting, and Squire and his wife were required to undergo public chastisement, acknowledging their fault in allowing their daughter to be too conversant with a worldling, and promised to be more careful in the future. When son Israel chose a wife outside the faith, Squire refused to humble himself again. Word of available land far south in the backcountry of North Carolina had reached the settlements in Pennsylvania. Squire chose to leave the Quaker faith, pack up his family's belongings, and rumble south down the Great Wagon Road. From Buffalo Trace to Warrior Path to Immigrant Thoroughfare, the Great Wagon Road stretched from Philadelphia into western Pennsylvania, down the full length of the Valley of Virginia and into eastern Tennessee. Another branch dips south through the backcountry of the Carolinas, all the way to the Savannah River at Augusta, Georgia. The journey from the Boone home in Pennsylvania to the North Carolina backcountry would have taken many weeks. It's thought that the Boones made a lengthy stopover near Harrisonburg, Virginia. Squire's sister and brother-in-law had settled there earlier. One member of the Boone immigration party was Squire's young blacksmithing apprentice, Henry Miller. A youth roughly the age of Squire's son Daniel, the two teens were best friends. And in the late summer and fall of 1750, the two boys set out on their first long hunt together. They headed east across the Blue Ridge and then down to the high Piedmont area along the Virginia-North Carolina border. Daniel had already shown great interest and aptitude as a hunter and neophyte woodsman. He had learned some skills from Indians near his home in Pennsylvania, and while helping his mother tend the family cow herd on outlying pasture lands, he had refined his stalking and shooting abilities. One family story states that when Squire was asked about Daniel's lack of formal schooling, he is said to have replied, "Let the girls do the reading and let Dan do the shooting. Between you and me, that's what we need the most." The two boys enjoyed great success on the hunt. They took many deer skins, which they transported to Philadelphia for sale. With the proceeds, they went on a week-long spending spree until they had exhausted their earnings. The spree disgusted Henry Miller, who determined after the hunt that he would settle down, make money, and keep it. Daniel, on the other hand, had greatly enjoyed both the hunt and the spending spree, and determined then and there that he would make his living as a market hunter. Late in 1751, the Boones finally reached their destination in western North Carolina, a spot above the forks of the Yadkin River that would become the town of Mocksville. Squire quickly established himself as a farmer and blacksmith, while Daniel assisted him, hunted, and driving a wagon, hauled his father's farm produce and other goods to and from the nearby market town of Salisbury. But while Daniel was passing from his teens into early adulthood, storm clouds were forming over frontier America. The British and French were at odds over the very lucrative fur trade rights to the Ohio River Valley. At age 20, Daniel Boone would experience the brutalities of war firsthand. He would also hear for the first time of the captivating land across the mountains that would one day bring him worldwide fame.